Hello again. This time let's look at the effect on the balance sheet of issuing debt and equity. So specifically we'll look at the assets side of the balance sheet and the liabilities and equities side of the balance sheet. We'd like to see what's happening in millions of dollars to our various little assets, like probably have some net fixed assets, net PP&E, probably have some current assets excluding cash, and most importantly we have cash. And then on the other side, hopefully we balance, and we have things like debt. And I'm going to make a separate line for stock so we can see how that row specifically is changing. But we also have our retained earnings and total liabilities excluding cash. Total current liabilities excluding cash. Put a T over there if we want to make it balanced. But this is what we're looking at for the type of chart we want to make. And the short answer is you're going to have a very difficult time finding a chart in Excel that will let you put different items on different bars. But we have a trick for that. So let's switch over to Excel. Looking at the balance sheet, we said before we wanted to look at these different items. I'm going to color them yellow. And I want to just look at the second year here, 2020, after we've had time for things to take full effect. And I'll color it yellow for the ease of the video. Now we could just come in here and start trying to plot things, but the trick I'd mentioned earlier is if we'll use two different rows over here, two different columns rather, one for assets and one for liabilities and equity, then we can refer to the assets in the first column, and we can refer to the liabilities and equities in the second column. And then the blank column will just show up as 0. So for simplicity, I'm going to put some labels over here. We know we're going to want to make them shorter anyway. I'd like to show you a trick here. And the first thing I'm going to do is insert a blank chart. We know we're going to want a stacked column chart. Probably said bar when I was looking at paper. And we've already got the x-axis labels, we've got the data, and we've got the series names. So if I were to click on this, look up at series, we've got the name, the X, the Y, and the order. So we have everything we need. I talked about two different ways to add data to charts in the last video. One was to right click on some white space, select data, and then it gives you the option to hit add, edit, remove, all kinds of different things here if you'd like to go through dialog boxes like that. And if you prefer to just work in the spreadsheet, you can change any of these boxes. If we didn't want both columns, we could back it up to one column. Go to both, we could add additional series like this. And that's what I wanted to do right now. I need a total of 7 series. So I'm going to say 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then when I click on the chart, it's the entire boxes that are highlighted. But if I click on an individual series, then I see just that data. So cash is in the right place. Current assets is in the right place. I've got some blank ones in between. So to get around on those, I'm going to click on the first series and then use the control up arrow to move these boxes around. And you can see every time I hit control up or control down, it moves me from one series to the next. So if I want to come down here and move that series down here, now instead of looking at those blank cells, the final series is looking at retained earnings. And the first trick I'd mentioned was how it jumped from assets to liabilities and equities. That's just because there's a number on the second column and not in the first. That's the only thing that made this pop up to 0. There's actually a little bitty bar, a little column right here that has 0 height for retained earnings based on this cell in 79. So I'm going to use my up and down arrows, and I'm going to repeat that process to move all of these onto a series. And by the time you finish this, I hope you're comfortable seeing that we can move any of the any of the three items, first three items in the series, with our mouse by clicking on the correct series or using Control up, down to go from one series to the next. Or when they were contiguous, we could click on the entire chart. So if you're unable to get just one series, it's because you're clicking on the chart and not that individual series. So play around with that. You'll find it immensely valuable, and you'll probably even see a question on the test like the following. What are 3 ways to change data that a chart looks at? 1 would be to right-click and select data. 2 would be to click the series and edit the formula bar. 3 would be to adjust the boxes with your mouse, showing the references that the series are looking at. Just like we could do that with any other formula in Excel. If I had a formula that said the sum of the 2 cells above it, I could edit that formula in the formula bar, or I could edit that formula by dragging the range of the arguments. Back to the chart. We don't really have a legend on here. We could add a legend. My trick breaks down when we try to add a legend, because it's a little bit difficult to see which are assets and which are liabilities and equities. So this is probably a good time to talk about data labels. If I'll click on a series and right click and add a data label, then that number pops up. I'm not too interested in what the number is, but if I format the data label, then I can show the series name and stop showing the value. I'm going to show a leader line just because I want to drag that data label out to the right. And then I'm going to repeat that for stock and debt. Now I'm going to turn off the legend. Could just hit that delete key on the legend, but I could also uncheck that box. Now I'm going to turn the sound off and move this to the top of the page by our dashboard so we can see what happens when we issue debt or equity. Here we are, and we can see that if the equity does not get issued, then I expect that green bar to get a lot smaller. It did. Everything stayed in balance. If the debt is issued, I expect the blue bar to get larger. The cash is getting correspondingly larger. But it's really hard to see this because this y-axis is changing. So what we're going to do is force that to scale to probably 3500. I'm going to right click somewhere on one of those labels so I can format that axis. And I don't really want to change, well, I guess I do. I don't want to change the 0, but notice it's auto, and if it accidentally had a negative value, it would go below 0. So if I add another 0 behind that decimal place, that's enough to remove the auto and change it to manual. We know it's manual because it gives us the option to reset it back to auto. And then on the maximum end of that, I'm going to give it 3500, hit tab, and it also is manual now to 3500. So now when I take away the equity or I take away the debt, it's very easy to see what's changing. The final thing I'd like to do is get the 3 of these that I'm interested in on top. If I look at cash right now, it's the first series. If I'd make it the 3rd, then that means this would be the 1st, the 2nd, and cash would be the 3rd. So let me change cash to 3, move it up to the top. And then stock and debt, I just want to be the last. And I don't know how many series there are. There are probably half a dozen or so. But I bet there are not 67. So I'm going to put a great big number like 67 in there. And that will move it to the end, which it turned out there were actually 7 series. I'm going to do the same thing with debt. I'm going to put 55 in there. Any big number greater than 7 would work. And that moves it to the end. So now we have cash, debt, and stock, and it's easy to see how those three change when we issue stock or debt. So in between videos, I'm going to rearrange this dashboard, and in the next video, we'll actually talk about gaining some insight from this dashboard about what's happening in our financial statements.